In 1932, there was a case that was so shocking that it was considered to be the crime of the century. It became so well known that it inspired Agatha Christie to write her most well-known murder mystery novel. So let's take a look into the crime that inspired Murder on the Orient Express. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today we are diving into the true story that inspired Agatha Christie's novel Murder on the Orient Express. If you don't know what the Murder on the Orient Express is about, it is a Hercule Poirot novel. He is the detective and he is traveling on the Orient Express, which is a train. And while he is traveling on this train, a murder happens and he is tasked to solve this crime. While solving this crime, he has to weed through many conspiracies, lies, and even kidnappings that have happened. And it is honestly one of my favorite novels that she has written. I enjoyed this novel and it obviously has inspired so many people as well, because there are so many movies and adaptations to this. So it is very popular and it has every reason to be. Now let's move on to the crime that inspired the story, and that is the kidnapping of the Lindbergh child. First off, let me give you a little more detail of the people involved in this case. We have Charles Lindbergh, who was born on February 4th, 1902. He developed an early interest in aviation and eventually became a barnstormer and later joined the army to become a pilot. However, Lindbergh is most well known for becoming the first person to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic. This historic flight from New York to Paris made him an American hero, and he became known all throughout the world for this event. In 1929, he married Anne Morrow and helped her achieve her pilot's license, and together they flew and explored many different countries. And on June 22nd, 1930, they both welcomed their son, Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr., also known as Charlie. And that's what we will refer to him as from now on, because both he and his father have the same name. So I will call Lindbergh, and I will call the son Charlie. After their son was born, they continued to fly and make trips around the world, and they left Charlie with Anne's mother and the nurse. When they were home, they would split their time between two different households. They would spend the week at the Morrow household, Anne's parents' house, and that was located in Inglewood. And then on the weekends, they would stay at a house that they built, and this was the Hopewell household. And they would stay there on the weekends. Normally, they would return to Inglewood on Monday morning after spending the weekend there, after spending the weekend at Hopewell. However, on the last weekend of February in 1932, they decided to stay over at the Hopewell house for an extra day or two because Charlie was sick. At 7:30 on March 1st in 1932, Charlie was put to bed in his nursery by his nurse, Betty Gow. Charlie was kept on a very, very strict schedule as per Lindbergh's demands. He was in bed by 7:30 and absolutely no one, not even the mother or the nurse, were to check on him until 10 o'clock. After he was put to bed, the nurse, Anne, and Charles went about their evening and did their things, whatever they did that evening. And at 10 p.m., Betty Gow went to check on Charlie in the nursery, as she normally did, and found that he was not in his crib. She checked with Anne first, who said she did not have the baby. And then they both thought that Lindbergh was playing a prank on them because he had been known to play some pretty nasty pranks, such as hiding Charlie in a closet and pretending that he was kidnapped, which happened just 2 months before this incident. So they went to Lindberg, who was in his study located directly below the nursery, and Betty Gow asked him, "Mr. Lindberg, do you have the baby? Please do not fool me." Lindberg got up and ran straight to his room, not the baby's room, his room, grabbed a gun and loaded a shotgun, and then went to Charlie's room, didn't even search around in his room for the baby, and just proclaimed that he was kidnapped. He then went to search around the house with the butler, but they found no signs of Charlie. Realizing the severity of the situation, they notified the police. And once Lindberg came back with the butler after searching for Charlie, they went to the nursery, and Lindberg found the ransom note on the windowsill. But he did not open it. And I would like to make a note, definitely make a note, the fact that Anne and Betty Gow, the nurse, were in the nursery most of the time. I'm pretty sure from what I've read, they stayed in there because Lindberg told them to stay in there, and they didn't see the ransom note. It wasn't found until Lindberg came back after searching for Charlie that this note was found. Okay, so Lindberg found the note. He did not open it. He deliberately delayed opening this ransom note despite knowing that it was likely from kidnappers and could have very vital information about their child's whereabouts. He did not want it to be opened and insisted that it had to be processed for fingerprints before anyone could open it. And this held up the investigation for 2 hours while they waited for fingerprint experts to arrive. Once the police arrived at the Lindbergh home, the initial investigation of the nursery and surrounding areas began. The ransom note was examined. After it was processed by the experts, and they found that it was demanding $50,000 for the safe return of Charlie. The note was filled with spelling and grammatical errors, which pointed towards that the kidnapper was possibly not a native speaker, and it also had a symbol on the note of 2 interlocking circles. While Lindbergh cooperated with the investigation to some degree, he tried to maintain control by limiting the police access to his staff. He rejected FBI help, and he carefully controlled all aspects of the crime scene. And this likely hampered the early stages of the investigation. I would also like to say that Lindbergh himself was not directly seen as a suspect, and he also was not looked into as a suspect, which to me feels wrong because parents should be looked at first. I know that sounds wrong, but if something happens to a child, parents need to be looked at first so they can be ruled out immediately. But the investigation was basically handed over to Lindbergh by somebody in the police force that had some kind of authority and knew Lindbergh, and just handed it over to him. There were some things that were found by the authorities once they got there and during the investigation. And of course we have the ransom note, and then there was a ladder that was found near the house. The ladder ended up being a crucial piece of evidence. It appeared to be constructed specifically for this kidnapping, as it could be taken apart for easy transport. The design and craftsmanship indicated that the kidnapper had some sort of carpentry skills. There were also footprints and tire marks there. Investigators found muddy footprints and tire marks that were near the house. By dawn, the news of the kidnapping had spread rapidly, and the story had become front page news all across the country. And for some reason, the Lindberghs decided to use a newborn photo of Charlie instead of a more recent picture. Charlie was actually almost 2 years old, and people were looking and thinking and believing that a baby was kidnapped and not a toddler. And it was eventually changed to a more recent picture of him, but still that initial report of the newsletters, that people were expecting a baby, but he was 20 months old, almost 2 years. 2 days later, on March 4th, a second ransom note arrived, and this one increased the demand of money to $70,000. And over the next few weeks, the Lindberghs actually received a total of 13 ransom notes, each with specific instructions and demands. Now, we have a new character joining the scene, and this is Dr. John Condon. He was a retired school principal, and he offered to act as an intermediary between the Lindberghs and the kidnappers. He actually placed an ad in the newspaper offering his services, and the kidnapper accepted. Okay, the kidnapper wrote a letter back to the newspaper and accepted this. That to me is absolutely crazy. It just doesn't make sense to me. The Lindberghs also agreed to use him as a mediator as well. So then we move on to March 12th, where John Condon meets a man calling himself John in a cemetery. This man agreed to provide proof to Dr. Condon that the child was alive, and a few days later, the Lindberghs received the child's sleeping suit as proof that Charlie was still alive. So they agreed to go ahead and pay the ransom. On April 2nd, 1932, the Lindberghs paid the $50,000 ransom in gold certificates to Cemetery John in another meeting at the cemetery, which is how he got coined the name Cemetery John, obviously. John gives them a note with the child, or a note that says the child is on a boat named Nellie near Martha's Vineyard, but no boat is found and the child is not returned. On May 12th, 1932, a truck driver finds the decomposed body of a child in the woods near the Lindbergh home. The body is identified as Charles Lindbergh Jr., and the cause of death is determined to be a blow on the head, and that he likely died the night that he was kidnapped. In the article that I will link below, a judge and researcher of this case, Lise Pearlman, states while she was going over the photos of the body with a pathologist, Dr. Speth, they found some things that were very suspicious. Charlie had only been missing for 10 weeks, but his body was mostly just skeletal remains. He was missing his kidneys, lungs, and spleen, which were originally thought to have been taken by wild animals. But Dr. Speth believes that animals would have gone for different parts, such as the liver or the head, which remained untouched. He also stated that there is no way kidneys would have completely deteriorated in just 10 weeks, and it looked as if it was surgically removed. He also took a look at a hole behind the child's ear, which had been deemed a bullet hole by investigators at that time. However, he believes it could have been due to the insertion of a hydrocephalic shunt, which keeps fluid from entering the brain. This, to me, I included it because it seems very suspicious, and you will see on later where we get to different theories about what could have happened to Charlie, or what could have happened, who could have done it. we'll get to it in just a little bit. 2 years later, in September 1934, a gold certificate from the ransom money is used in a gas station in New York City. Because gold certificates were being phased out for the bill currency that we have today, it drew the attention of the attendant in the gas station, so he wrote down the license plate number of the customer who used it, and this led the police to Richard Bruno Hauptmann, a German immigrant and carpenter. On September 19th, 1934, Hauptmann was arrested. The police find over $14,000 of ransom money hidden in his garage, but Hauptmann claimed he had no knowledge of the money's origin, and that he actually received the money from his friend and partner in business, Isidore Fish, he had given him the money before returning to Germany, where he died from consumption. On January 2nd, 1935, Hauptmann's trial began, and it was deemed the trial of the century. Hauptmann was found guilty based on the ransom money found in his possession. His handwriting was analyzed and linked him to the ransom notes, and a testimony from Dr. John Condon identified him as Cemetery John during the trial. Although Condon previously could not identify him during a lineup before the trial. And despite Hauptmann maintaining his innocence and having several witnesses of his own placing him at a bakery on March 1st, Hauptmann was found guilty and sentenced to death. Today, there are many people that believe that Hauptmann was actually the fall guy and not the real kidnapper. They believe that authorities wanted to find the kidnappers so badly that they basically made this witch hunt so they could end the case. There are several things that happened during the trial that raised some red flags. The first is the handwriting analysis. They had several handwriting experts that came in and made him rewrite words until it was similar to the ransom notes. There was one expert that even initially said that Hauptmann did not write the ransom letters, but changed his mind after the ransom money was found, leaving the question whether or not this man was paid to change his answer. The latter was another key factor to achieve the guilty verdict. It was stated that the grain on a piece of wood from the latter matched the grain from a piece of wood from Hauptmann's attic, but many don't believe that it actually does. Also, there were a lot of discrepancies on when the attic was searched and when the missing board was noted. This even caused Governor Hoffman to be suspicious, and he noted, "It is very strange that this board's absence from the attic floor was not previously noticed, especially by the searching party of September 22nd, who were looking for what must have been some sort of small article, the symbol maker, and who also were undoubtedly searching for the ransom money, a task which would of itself attract their attention to anything of irregular nature in the attic or elsewhere in the house." And the one thing I find curious about the latter is that it was poorly constructed. If Hauptmann was a carpenter, why would he have made such a poorly constructed ladder that could barely hold the weight of an officer that tried to recreate the scene? Plus, add on the fact that the kidnapper would be carrying a 30-pound, almost 2-year-old child down the ladder with him. It just wouldn't hold that weight. And the last thing that drew my attention was that Hauptmann had several witnesses that say they saw him at a bakery on March 1st. Here is part of Hauptmann's statement. "But what of the Fredericksons, who said I was always in the bakery on Tuesday and Friday nights? March 1st was a Tuesday. What of my wife, honest and loyal and an upright Christian woman to whom truth is sacred? What of the young man, Carlson, against whose character not a bit of evidence could be found? What of Louis Kiss, who definitely knew the night he saw me and could fix it by 2 separate events, both of moment in his life? What of Von Hankey? What of Manley, the old man who arose from a sickbed to come and testify on the night of March 1st? At 9 o'clock in the evening, he saw me in the Frederickson bakery. That, coupled with the fact that he even had proof that he was working all day on April 2nd until 5:30, so he could not have been the man in the cemetery retrieving the ransom money. Regardless of all this information and discrepancies, he was found guilty, and on April 3rd, 1936, Hauptmann was executed in the electric chair, his last words proclaiming his innocence. I am glad that my life in a world which has not understood me has ended. Soon I will be at home with my Lord, so I am dying an innocent man. Should, however, my death serve for the purpose of abolishing capital punishment, such a punishment being arrived at only by circumstantial evidence, I feel that my death has not been in vain. I am at peace with God. I repeat, I protest my innocence of this crime for which I was convicted. However, I die with no malice or hatred in my heart. The love of Christ has filled my soul, and I am happy in him. While Hauptmann was convicted and executed, the case was far from closed in the public's mind. There are several conspiracy theories out there, so we are going to go through some of the most popular ones. The first one is that there was a mafia connection. Organized crime was very popular during this time due to the prohibition, and the rise in kidnappings for ransom also started becoming popular. So some people believe that the mafia was connected, and even figures such as Al Capone were suggested to be linked to the kidnapping, but no concrete evidence was found to link anyone from the mafia to this case. The second theory is that Charlie's death was actually staged and he was raised under a different identity. But while I was researching, I found this sort of Mandela effect where some people swear that the body was never found and that Charlie was still missing. Now, years later, they see that Charlie was actually found, but believe that this never actually happened. The next theory is that some believe that Hauptmann didn't act alone and that there were accomplices that were never identified. And then the last theory is actually 2 theories in one, and that is that this crime was actually an inside job. Some of the things that make people believe this is plausible is that whoever did this had to know that the Lindbergs were at the Hopewell house, since they never stayed there during the week. They also had to know Charlie's routine and even where his bedroom was located. The first person in this theory is that the nanny was in on it with her boyfriend. The nurse was the closest person to Charlie and knew everything about him, so many believe that she relayed information to her boyfriend and he handled the kidnapping. This was disproven, but some people still believe it could be plausible. The next one is one of the most persistent and controversial theories out there, and that is that Charles Lindbergh orchestrated this crime himself. He was very controlling, and not just with his rigid routines for Charlie, but with the investigation as well. He limited police access to his home and the crime scene as much as possible. He didn't want them speaking to any of his servants or anyone from the household. He managed all aspects to the ransom negotiation on his own and rejected FBI help. He was basically given full control of the investigation of his own child's kidnapping and was never investigated himself, which some see that this was his way of manipulating the investigation. He also refused to open the ransom letter for 2 whole hours until it was fingerprinted. He also was the person that drove Dr. Condon to the cemetery on one of the meetups with the kidnapper and claimed to have heard the voice of John from half a block away, with his windows being rolled up. During the trial, Lindbergh at first said that he wouldn't be able to recognize the voice because it had been so long, but when he was on the stand, he said that he heard and knew that Hauptmann was the man in the cemetery. Another big factor is that Lindbergh was very much a proponent of eugenics. There are some that believe that Charlie's medical documents were tampered with and hidden to hide the fact that he was ill. A lot of people believe that he suffered from rickets. And because Lindbergh did not care for the fact that he, someone who believed in eugenics and believed in the perfect race, had a child that was sick and less than perfect. So people believe that he orchestrated all of this with his friend and fellow eugenicist, Dr. Alexis Carroll, who worked at the Rockefeller Institute. Lindbergh was fascinated with Carroll's work that included trying to keep organs alive out of the body. But soon Carroll was out of organs and low on funds, so people believe that Lindbergh kidnapped Charlie to use him for these experiments and possibly to help fund the research as well. This, coupled with the fact that Charlie was missing some organs and had a hole in his skull that was similar to a medical procedure, plus the fact that Lindbergh had his body cremated really quickly after they found him, definitely makes you wonder if this could be true. This case actually, and this theory actually goes a whole lot deeper, and it is actually very dark, and so you can research more if you want to, but I'm going to wrap it up right there because I don't really want to go any further. But it is no wonder that Agatha Christie drew inspiration from this crime for the murder on the Orient Express. She may not have known all of these facts, but I found myself becoming more interested the deeper that I dug into this case. Let me know if you like this type of video and if you think it was Hauptmann or if you believe that it was actually one of the other theories. But I will see you all next time. Bye!